From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. Glad you're with us today. I'm Lori Tucker, along with our legal analyst, Greg Isaacs. Thank you for coming in, as always,
Lori,
every Wednesday.
Good to be here.
Yes, and we're talking about a case that's a little over a year old now, a case that really gripped the nation, and especially people in this part of the country, because it happened in Nashville. Of course, we're talking about Riley Strain, the college student, 22 years old, who was missing after a night out with his fraternity brothers, again in Nashville along Broadway. He'd been kicked out of Luke Bryan's bar. Apparently he, was quite intoxicated, and his body sadly was found a little bit later in the Cumberland River. Such a sad case. And now his parents, here's the update, everybody. His parents have filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the fraternity that he was there in Nashville visiting with for their annual formal. So let's talk about, Greg, this sad case, which we've talked about before, and what led to this wrongful death lawsuit.
Well, a very sad case that gripped the Nashville area and the nation when 22-year-old Riley Strain went missing on March 8th of 2024 after actually being asked to leave Luke Bryant's bar in Lower Broadway. After a search and some assistance from some local media personnel who found some identifying information on the banks of the Cumberland River.
They found his debit card. These are social media personalities who stumbled upon that.
They did, and they were doing their own canvassing and investigation. Law enforcement somehow had overlooked it, but Riley Strain was found drowned in the Cumberland River. Subsequent forensic autopsies revealed that his blood alcohol was 0.224. The legal limit here in the state of Tennessee, as most states that receive federal highway funding, is 0.08. He also had Delta 9 in his system. So that's kind of the backdrop. And what we have, there was a very exhaustive investigation by the Nashville Police, Davidson County, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. No criminal charges were ever brought in this case. There was a lot of scrutiny being placed on Luke Bryant's bar.
And they determined Riley Strain was not overserved.
Correct. The investigation determined that he was not overserved at any restaurant, bar, establishment on Broadway.
And you see video, we've highlighted it here, of Riley walking really sadly toward his death. There's the river, and apparently, obviously he went the wrong way, didn't know where he was going, went the opposite way from where his hotel was, and his body was found 4 minutes from his hotel.
And Lori, what's interesting is as we see these videos from street cams in this compilation that kind of traces Riley's last moments as he kind of stumbles around Lower Broadway, the wrongful death lawsuit filed by his family kind of is the prequel and showed what was taking place prior to the video that we've all seen and the country has seen. I'm
shuffling through papers here because I want to show you all. We have the lawsuit here, thanks to Hope, our digital producer here. I mean, it's pages and pages, lots of counts that they go over, and every fraternity brother who was there that night is named in this lawsuit. And the fraternity as well.
It's a wrongful death lawsuit that's filed in the Circuit Court for Missouri.
Which is where Riley's from, where the
Delta
Chi,
the fraternity was based. And the view from Google Earth on this lawsuit, it's really amazing for two reasons. One, their theory of liability as it relates to this number of defendants, and also factually it takes us inside that fraternity as they traveled from Missouri to Nashville for this formal. And here's basically the allegations are that the chapter advisor, the brothers, as they're called in the lawsuit, were guilty of negligence based on a variety of reasons. and it kind of details that in this formal, a number of buses were chartered to take fraternity members to Nashville. Apparently, there was alcohol on the buses. The lawsuit alleges that Riley Strain was unsupervised and overserved. They were provided alcohol along with Jello shooters, and that
Before they even got out of the bus.
before they even got out of the bus. So this lawsuit alleges that Riley Strain was intoxicated before his boots hit the ground in Nashville.
Let's talk about this really quickly, Greg, for people who don't know legally what is negligence.
Negligence, basically, there are four elements of negligence. Missouri is very similar to Tennessee law. One, that you owe a duty of care to someone. Second, that you breached the duty of care that you owe to someone. Third, that breach of the duty of care is the proximate cause of the injuries or damages, and that they were damaged. So basically, you have a duty to use reasonable care. In this case, they're saying that the fraternity did not adhere to its written policies and procedures as it related to road trips, to the consumption of alcohol, that the chapter advisors should have taken more scrutiny as it related to supervision of this fraternity as it traveled from Missouri to Nashville. And it's interesting in this lawsuit that they're alleging that the other members, and this were, I think, one of the legal challenges to this lawsuit, and I can envision a number of motions to dismiss being filed, whether the individual brothers have a duty to a friend, colleague, fraternity member to supervise or otherwise ensure that he does not become overly intoxicated.
Because again, Riley's 22.
He's 22.
He's an adult, legally of age. Let me read this. This is number 65, count 65 here. It says, when a bar kicked Riley out, Riley's fraternity brothers had two options. Go with Riley, make sure he was safe, and take care of him. Or, two, continue to party. Riley's Delta Chi brothers chose to continue partying.
Well, this is what's interesting. So, do you legally owe now, as a friend, as a person, as a human,
morally,
morally, when you see somebody that's vulnerable, you want to put them in a cab. You want to make sure they get somewhere safe. Legally, do you owe a duty to a third party when you see that they're intoxicated or kicked out of a bar? That's going to be an interesting legal question as this case unfolds to the Missouri courts.
Riley's parents also saying, no one called us. But again, you're talking about adults. How far can you go with that legally?
Well, that's interesting, and that's what this lawsuit's going to sort out. But the fraternity, they're going to be, in terms of establishing their standard of care, I think this lawsuit does a good job in asserting that they deviated from their own written policies and procedures. And I'm sure the university has its own policies and procedures as it relates to the behavior of Greek organizations. But then, it starts to get a little more removed and tenuous.
Let's talk about that when we come back. I'll stop you there.
Let's do it.
Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. Glad you're with us today. We're here for 30 minutes taking a deep dive into the Riley Strain, that tragic case, the college student visiting Nashville from Missouri almost exactly a year ago, losing his life after drinking and losing his way, his body found in the Cumberland River not long after he went missing. But his parents say it was too long and somebody's got to be held responsible. That's the new wrongful death lawsuit we're talking about today. And when we left you, you were talking about, before break, you were talking about the advisors and maybe their role here legally. Well,
they're also sued in the complaint, and they say that the chapter advisors didn't do enough, didn't actively supervise. So that's going to be interesting in terms of, again, when you have a lawsuit such as this that is based on negligence, that's a establishing a duty of reasonable care and a breach of that duty. What degree of involvement should a chapter advisor have? Should they have been hands-on when they knew they were taking a field trip?
As chaperones?
As chaperones. Again, no, these are adults typically. So, that's going to be interesting to see how that legal standard of care. But, Lori, the other thing that really jumps out is suing all the brothers by saying they didn't go with him when he was kicked out of the bar. They didn't take steps to protect him from being overserved.
Is that unusual to you? Have you seen things like this where they name everybody that could have been involved?
Well, if they were owners, operators, shareholders, but they're members of a fraternity, so they're basically friends, college students, colleagues. And I think an analogy can be drawn for under Tennessee law to the Good Samaritan law. And basically, you don't have liability if you stop to help somebody, but you can assume a duty under certain circumstances. But typically, the law does not impose an affirmative duty to go take somebody to the room that's an adult that's overserved, to otherwise tell them to stop drinking. That's probably done every day in every fraternity, every sorority, every bar across America.
Everybody has a story.
Yeah, everybody has a story.
Let's look at number 68 here, and this kind of goes along with what you're saying. This is in the lawsuit. I'm reading here, Riley's fraternity brothers, according to his parents, failed to notice by approximately 1 a.m. on March 9th. Remember, he was reported or went missing on March 8th. Most of the Delta Chi group returned to the hotel. His roommates for the night saw he wasn't in the room. They did nothing. There was no search, no panic. No one called 911 to report he had failed to make the 12-minute walk back to the hotel in over 3 hours. The fraternity brothers did not even think to call Riley's parents. They simply got ready for bed and went to sleep.
Very, very interesting to me from a legal analysis. If you're defending this lawsuit or you're a judge making a decision on a motion for summary judgment, which invariably will be filed, that's a legal pleading that typically alleges there are no genuine issues of material fact or law, and a case should be dismissed. What I would want to see in a complaint of this nature is the designation of these fraternity brothers, whether there were officers that were in charge of supervision. Typically you have officers that are elected. Then I think you may be able to establish some sort of duty of care.
Is
but
there
when you
a
have
contract that some of them may have to sign in terms of their duties in that office?
Typically not. There's a handbook that's referenced in the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Failing to call the parents, I don't know any legal requirement that mandates anyone saying, hey, your son is intoxicated and didn't come back to the room.
Reading this, you got to feel you feel their angst
I
and
feel,
their absolute
I feel
heartbreak.
the hurt and the emotion just jumps out of the complaint and the words. But on the other hand, again, when you talk about a legal duty, that's a high standard. So it's really going to be interesting whether these brothers, friends, colleagues are responsible for not taking affirmative steps to help Riley when he was kicked out of Luke Bryant's bar.
Let's talk about the timing of this. This happened almost a year to the day that this lawsuit was filed, so there is a statute of limitations.
Yeah, typically there's always a statute of limitations, and I would assume Missouri law is similar to Tennessee, so they filed it basically a year to the day of when Riley went missing. So that's kind of why you see that.
And a reminder, this is not a criminal case.
It's not a criminal case. So that's interesting. Another thing that comes to mind, when Luke Bryant's bar was put under a investigative and legal microscope, and they were found not to have done anything inappropriate. Tennessee, when you talk about a lawsuit involving alcohol, our legislature has spoken very strongly and clearly on this issue, and the law is that the furnishing of alcohol is not the proximate cause of an accident. It is the consumption of alcohol, and it is a bar for recovery. Now, Lori, there are two exceptions: whether someone is served and they're underage, or whether someone is served and they are obviously intoxicated. But those two scenarios are limited to recoveries from injured parties, not the party itself. So, again, that's another hurdle that the plaintiffs are going to have to get over in this lawsuit, and that is Riley Strain's. As tragic as this is, the fact that fraternity allowed or provided the alcohol, the transportation, there was no supervision apparently, etc. But his personal responsibility in consuming the Jello shooters, as alleged, the alcohol,
Before
the
they ever
Delta
step
9,
foot.
before they ever step
Yeah.
foot. So that's another hurdle. Missouri, like Tennessee, is a comparative fault case, so that can diminish any type of verdict. But I think that the lawsuit, to me, two things really jump out. One, to hold, and there's been an epidemic, and I've been involved when you talk about fraternity and Greek responsibility. It's kind of like wink, wink, nod, nod. We don't haze, we don't overdrink, and everybody knows it goes on every weekend in every campus
And
across.
it has for years and years
and it has for years. But if this case was limited to the failure to protect, supervise, overserve, etc., that to me would make a lot of sense. I think the lawsuit gets a little overbroad when you sue the other brothers and seek to legally impose a duty on them to remedy Riley Strain's own conduct by voluntarily consuming alcohol.
Then how would this lawsuit, anybody can file a lawsuit, clearly, but what about any kind of advice the parents got to file this?
Well,
having
let's
said
not,
what
again,
just said?
the law
I
can
know
be
you don't
different in
want to talk
Missouri
about
and
another
whatever.
attorney.
I'm just saying, generally, when you look at it, there's certain things that really jump out, and that is the supervision and the duty a fraternity may have, having alcohol on the bus, whether officers may have a higher duty than other brother members.
But you think this may be dismissed?
I think some of the counts could be ripe for a motion for summary judgment because
Anything that could stick?
they're not, well, I think it's going to be interesting on what the written protocol policies and procedures were for Delta Chi. I think whether there was some supervision by the chapter advisors, what their role was, whether the fraternity officers were complicit in serving the Jello shooters, the alcohol, and not having supervision. Those are things to me that really stand out because if you think of it big picture from Google Earth, there has to be some degree, and think about this now, fraternity members, they just don't let you in for free. So you go through a vetting process called pledging, you pay quarterly semester dues. So it is a business. The house is a chartered LLC in Missouri. So that to me is going to be the interesting thing, and that is the duty of care, lack of supervision from the major players, and that's the fraternity, the officers. Everything else, I think, may be ripe for a motion for summary judgment.
All right, we are going to continue talking, start to wrap this up. When we come back, stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the death last year, almost a year to the day, of Riley Strain, the Missouri college student who went to Nashville for a formal party.
Terrible tragedy.
It was such a tragedy. And one thing we haven't brought up yet, Greg, is that he was missing for a couple of weeks. His body wasn't found until March 24th, face down in the Cumberland River. Just horrifying. You can tell he comes from a good, caring family. They have filed a lawsuit, a wrongful death lawsuit. And as we mentioned, obviously this is not a criminal case. It was determined that nobody really broke any laws. We're looking at the morality of this kind of thing and whether these parents have a case.
Well, again, our hearts go out to the parents that filed this lawsuit. No parent should have to endure what they went through. And when you do entrust your son or your daughter to a Greek organization or university, you expect them to adhere to their policies and procedures. And Lori, if you could let me reach over you, if I may.
We have pages and pages here.
We have pages, but if you look at the information and the written materials that were actually given to the parents, it talks about their influence, it talks about their control.
As it says here, Delta Chi's control is evidenced by dozens of specific requirements that it imposed upon the Delta Chi officers, which you brought up earlier, and members, that dictated how the day-to-day affairs of the chapter were to be conducted, and not limited to a whole list of things.
And Lori, that's going to be interesting because what you're going to see in the lawsuit is those lawyers point out and ask the chapter advisors, ask the officers, did you do this? Did you adhere to this? What steps did you take? So that is going to be kind of the benchmark in terms of defining the standard of care that was breached. And all too often you have all of these employee handbooks, fraternity, sorority handbooks that are designed to make it look pristine
Yeah.
and kind of like a Stepford wife, a neighborhood where everything is perfect every day and no one does anything wrong. But the problem is, except when it doesn't and it don't. And then you take those regulations and those rules and those requirements, the information that they provided to the parents, um, and ask, did you do what you were required to do? And in this instance, again, whether they should have had a duty uh, analogous to the Good Samaritan law, I think those claims are going to be quickly vetted and filtered through. But these claims, I think, have some potential merit and teeth, and it's going to be interesting to see how the chapter advisors, how the officers answer those questions on why this supervision wasn't done.
And if it changes any bylaws for them.
Well, it is, but the bylaws are going to be the bylaws that were in existence at the time.
Right.
I would be surprised if this Delta Chi chapter, maybe, I don't know the status of it right now, could have their charter revoked. But one thing that's interesting, this is a legal entity, and it has to conduct itself as a corporation, an LLC. So there are certain responsibilities, and they run these fraternities and sororities like a business, because that's what their charter recalls. So it is going to really be interesting when you juxtapose the alcohol and Jello shooters in the bus. And it was a sponsor. This wasn't, hey, email, let's all go to Nashville for the weekend. For a fraternity event, how that holds up under their own rules and regulations.
You know what's really sad too, in the lawsuit, and I don't know that we were aware of this at the time, but apparently, according to his parents, Riley said, I don't really want to go. He was kind of a soft-spoken young man and didn't really, as his parents said, live the quote-unquote life of a fraternity brother. He was in the fraternity but didn't party a lot. They talked him into going, and that's said in this as well, and that kind of jumped out as me.
Morally, it's sad, and again, our heart goes out to the parents. Legally, does that matter?
Right.
Probably not. What matters is, did that fraternity and the officers and the chapter advisors adhere to the rules and regulations that were set forth, and that standard of care? And Lori, if you look at it with the big picture again from Google Earth, you can't tell me that you can't, in the name of a fraternity, corporation, or whatever, load a bus full of a bunch of young people, ply them with alcohol, Jello shooters, dump them out in a strange city, and think everything is going to come out hunky-dory. So, this case is unfortunate, but I think you see things that happen like this all too often, and it's going to be interesting how this case winds its way through the Missouri Circuit Courts, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on what the court's going to do with those individual members and brothers that are being sued.
And you have to think about those young men. This will stay with them obviously forever. So regardless of what's happening legally, I know my heart is going in a different direction. This is going to stay with them
But let's
forever.
just talk about this from the practicality of the situation. If your son or daughter was sued in this lawsuit, there may or may not be insurance coverage. If they're not officers, I don't think that the insurance would cover it for the fraternity, but they're going to have to retain counsel. They could be subject to a deposition under oath, written interrogatories, discoveries. If they're not dismissed, if the court finds there are genuine issues of material fact, then the plaintiffs have asked for a jury trial. So this is something that's going to impact them, even if they get out of the lawsuit, financially, emotionally. So very unfortunate, but this lawsuit is really asking some very tough questions that need to be answered. And I don't think the answer is going to be yes to all of them. But again, at the end of the day, heart goes out to those parents, and hopefully this will never happen again.
Well, let's hope not. Two things before we let you go. One, we didn't talk about any monetary requests because there aren't any in here. Of course, they're
There's not a
hoping
number.
there's not a number. They're
Yes.
asking for that in terms of what he would have earned in the future, what his life would have been like in the future.
And those are typical things
Trying to put
in
a
a
number.
wrongful death
Yeah.
case. Yeah, value of his life, the pecuniary value, future earning, etc.
Right. Okay. We're going to talk more about this at 5:30. Thank you so
Let's
much
do.
for being with us. This is not over yet. We'll be watching this case, as you mentioned, and we'll let you know how it proceeds through the legal system. Thanks so much for being with us.